We've all had that one boss. The one who sits quietly in the corner office, speaks only when spoken to, and looks like they could be knocked over by a strong breeze. In the ruthless corporate landscape, these individuals are often viewed not as leaders, but as targets. They are the ones the ambitious entry-level hotshots mock by the water cooler, the ones the aggressive middle managers openly bulldoze in boardrooms. We mistake their patience for weakness and their silence for compliance. But there is a dangerous line between a boss who is passive and a boss who is simply waiting. Welcome to a compilation of absolute corporate reckonings. Today, we are diving deep into 3 distinct, slow-burn tales of workplace revenge. These are the chronicles of employees who thought they could play the system, exploit the quiet, and climb the ladder by stepping on the very people who built it. They learned the hard way that when you push an underestimated boss to their absolute limit, the retaliation isn't a quick slap on the wrist. It is a systematic, scorched earth demolition of your entire career. Grab a coffee, settle in, and let's begin with our first tale, the ghost in the architecture. To understand Julian, you had to understand the way he held his pen. It was always a cheap, blue ballpoint, chewed at the cap, held loosely between 2 fingers that looked entirely too weary to design the city's skyline. Julian was 58, wore tweed jackets that smelled faintly of stale filter coffee, and spoke in a monotone cadence that could put a hyperactive toddler to sleep. He was the head of technical architecture at Apex Structural, a firm that specialized in massive, multi-million-dollar commercial high-rises. To the executive board, Julian was just a legacy fixture, a piece of office furniture that had survived 3 corporate buyouts. To Marcus, the newly hired 29-year-old senior project director, Julian was an obstacle. Marcus was everything Julian was not. He wore tailored navy suits, spoke in sharp, buzzword-heavy sentences, and possessed an unearned arrogance that thrived on the suffering of others. Marcus was brought in to spearhead the Vanguard Tower, a 60-story luxury residential project that was supposed to put Apex Structural on the global map. From day one, Marcus made it his personal mission to make Julian obsolete. The old man is a bottleneck, Marcus would tell the VP of operations over expensive lunches. He's still cross-checking load-bearing calculations by hand. We live in the age of automated BIM software. He's slowing down my timeline, and frankly, his salary is a waste of corporate overhead. Julian knew what Marcus was doing. He wasn't blind. He sat through meetings where Marcus would openly interrupt him, rolling his eyes whenever Julian raised concerns about structural integrity or municipal coding delays. Julian, Marcus would say, flashing a blinding, predatory smile. We're building a monument here, not a bunker. The software has already accounted for the wind shear at 80 stories. We don't need you spending 3 days verifying the concrete tensile strengths. Julian would just blink slowly, adjust his wire-rimmed glasses, and say, the software is only as good as the parameters we feed it. Marcus, if the base data is flawed, the building is a hazard. Thanks for the history lesson, Professor. We'll take it from here. Marcus would snap, dismissing him in front of junior interns who had once looked up to Julian as a mentor. The disrespect escalated from passive-aggressive comments to outright sabotage. Marcus began forgetting to invite Julian to crucial stakeholder meetings. He rerouted project emails past Julian's desk. Finally, 3 months into the project, Marcus made his move to completely cut the legs out from under the older man. Marcus took Julian's proprietary, meticulously calculated structural blueprint for the Vanguard Tower's foundational core, a layout Julian had spent 6 months perfecting, and uploaded it into the company's new cloud system under his own name. He stripped Julian's digital signature from the metadata, replaced it with his own, and presented it to the CEO as his own masterpiece. The next day, Julian was called into the VP's office. Marcus was already there, leaning against the glass wall, looking smug. Julian, the VP sighed. rubbing his temples. Marcus has demonstrated that he can handle the structural oversight of Vanguard entirely through his automated pipeline. We feel that your traditional approach is no longer aligned with the speed of this project. Effective today, we're removing you from Vanguard. You're being reassigned to oversee the municipal archive digitization project in the basement. It's a quiet role. Suits your pace. It was a public execution. Marcus smiled, a tiny, vicious twitch of his lips. He expected Julian to argue, to rage, to threaten a lawsuit. Instead, Julian just looked at the blue ballpoint pen in his hand. He clicked it once. "I understand," Julian said softly. "The Vanguard project is highly complex. If you believe Marcus is capable of managing its foundations, I will step aside." "I'm more than capable, old man," Marcus sneered as Julian stood up. Julian packed his things into a single cardboard box. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. But as he walked out of the glass doors of the executive suite, he did one thing that no one noticed. He took his personal external hard drive, the one containing 40 years of custom-coded structural formulas, historical soil density maps of the city, and proprietary stress testing algorithms, and placed it in his coat pocket. Marcus thought he had won. With Julian relegated to the windowless basement, archiving dusty blueprints from the 1970s, Marcus fast-tracked the Vanguard Tower. He pushed the engineering team to their limits, cutting corners on material costs to underbid competitors and keep the board ecstatic. The CEO touted Marcus as a prodigy. For months past, the foundation of the Vanguard Tower was poured. The steel superstructure began to rise, piercing the city skyline, 20 stories of gleaming chrome and concrete. Marcus was on track for a $500,000 bonus and a seat on the executive board. Then, the rain came. It wasn't just a storm. It was a historic, 3-week torrential deluge that saturated the city's low-lying clay foundations. On a Tuesday morning, a junior engineer rushed into Marcus's glass office, his face pale, holding a tablet displaying real-time telemetry data from the Vanguard construction site. "Marcus, we have a problem," the engineer stammered. "The lasers on the subterranean retaining walls, they're showing a shift. The western core foundation has shifted by 4 millimeters over the last 48 hours. Marcus scoffed, spinning around in his leather chair. 4 millimeters? That's within the margin of error for settling. The software would flag it if it was a critical failure. "That's the thing," the engineer said, his voice trembling. "The software isn't flagging it because the automated parameters were set for solid bedrock. But according to these readings, the water table has risen so high that the clay beneath the western pier is liquefying. The building is tilting, Marcus. If it hits 12 millimeters, the structural integrity of the lower columns will compromise. The whole thing will pancake." Marcus's blood ran cold. He pulled up his stolen blueprint, the one he claimed to have authored. He stared at the complex matrix of numbers, but without Julian's proprietary formulas, the digital model was just a pretty picture. Marcus didn't actually know how the math worked. He had relied on the software, and the software had been fed the wrong environmental data because Marcus had skipped the manual soil testing phase to save time. "Fix the parameters." Marcus screamed. "Run the correction algorithm." "We can't," the engineer whispered. The core code for the stress testing module was hosted on Julian's private local drive. When he was reassigned, that data went offline. "We don't have the source code to calculate the counterweight distribution needed to stabilize the foundation. Only Julian knows how to calculate the manual shift." Panic, cold and sharp, gripped Marcus's chest. If the Vanguard Tower collapsed, or if word got out that the foundation was failing, Apex Structural would go bankrupt, and Marcus would face criminal negligence charges. Swallowing every ounce of his pride, Marcus sprinted down the stairs, bypassing the elevators, down into the dark, damp basement of the building. He kicked open the heavy door to the municipal archives. There, sitting under a buzzing fluorescent tube light, was Julian. He was peacefully scanning an old blueprints folder, sipping his filter coffee. "Julian," Marcus gasped, out of breath. "I need you. Upstairs. Right now. The Vanguard Tower. The Western Pier is sliding. The clay is liquefying. The software is blind, and we don't have your calculation sheets. You need to come up and fix the model." Julian didn't look up from his scanner. He carefully turned a yellowed page. "I'm afraid I cannot do that, Marcus. As you and the VP pointed out, my traditional methods are a bottleneck. I wouldn't want to slow down your timeline. Julian, please." Marcus was practically begging, his tailored suit soaked in sweat. "The building is at 4 millimeters. If it hits 12, it's over. Lives are at risk. My career is at risk." Julian finally stopped. He placed the blue ballpoint pen onto the desk, aligning it perfectly parallel to the edge. He looked up, his eyes entirely devoid of the warmth Marcus had spent months mocking. They were cold, sharp, and terrifyingly calculated. "Your career was over the moment you stripped my name from my blueprints, Marcus," Julian said, his voice a calm, chilling whisper. Marcus froze. You knew. "I built the infrastructure of this company," Julian said softly, leaning forward. "Did you truly believe I wouldn't notice a primitive script deleting my metadata? I let you take the project, Marcus, because I knew exactly what would happen. I warned you about the water table in January. You called it a history lesson. I warned you about the automated parameters. You called me a waste of corporate overhead. I'm sorry." Marcus choked out, tears of absolute panic welling in his eyes. "Please, Julian, fix it. Tell me what to do." Julian checked his watch. At the current rate of saturation, the Western Pier will hit 7 millimeters by noon. At that point, the municipal authorities will detect the variance and issue a mandatory evacuation of the entire city block. The news will break by 1 p.m. Julian reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a neatly typed bound document. He slid it across the desk. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a formal contract. "This is an unconditional admission of plagiarism and data theft, signed by you, detailing exactly how you stole my work and falsified the soil reports to fast-track the Vanguard Tower," Julian said. "Attached to it is my new employment agreement. I return as Chief Technical Officer, with full veto power over all projects and a compensation package that reflects 25% of Vanguard's total budget." "This is extortion," Marcus yelled. Julian picked up his blue pen. "No, this is structural engineering. I am simply calculating the cost of stabilizing a collapse." He glanced at the clock. "It is now 11:15 a.m. You have 45 minutes to sign that document and have the VP and CEO countersign it. If it passes 12 p.m., I destroy the hard drive containing the counterweight algorithms. I walk out of this building and I watch your monument fall on the evening news." Marcus stared at the quiet, unassuming man he had bullied for months. He realized with a sickening jolt in his stomach that Julian was never a victim. He was a predator who had simply built a maze, stepped back, and watched Marcus walk straight into the trap. At 11:42 a.m., the document was signed by Marcus, the VP, and the CEO in a frantic, weeping panic. At 11:50 a.m., Julian walked onto the construction site. He didn't look at Marcus. He plugged his external drive into the main terminal, manually overrode the software, and typed in a sequence of 24 custom algorithmic variables he had written 10 years prior. Within minutes, the hydraulic stabilization pumps engaged, pumping high-density grout into the liquefying clay, halting the tilt at exactly 6.8 millimeters. The building was saved. Marcus's career, however, was in ashes. By the following Monday, Julian was moved into a massive top-floor corner office. Marcus was not fired. Julian explicitly requested he stay. Marcus was stripped of his title, his bonus, and his dignity, reassigned to the windowless basement to digitize dusty blueprints under Julian's direct, unforgiving supervision. And every single morning, Marcus has to walk into the basement, sit at a cold metal desk, and look at a single chewed blue ballpoint pen sitting waiting for him on his ledger. Julian's story is a masterclass in patience, but structural engineering isn't the only field where silence is dangerous. The mistake Marcus made, and the mistake so many corporate climbers make, is assuming that a quiet boss is an ignorant one. They think that if someone isn't shouting their achievements from the rooftops, they aren't keeping score. But our next story takes us out of the corporate high-rises and into the high-stakes, cutthroat world of digital media and tech startups. This is a landscape built on optics, branding, and immediate results. Here, a new breed of predator thrives, the charismatic middle manager, who rides on the coattails of their team's grueling labor. If Story 1 was about a boss who allowed a bad employee to build their own trap, Story 2 is about a boss who quietly handed an abusive subordinate an entire empire, knowing exactly how heavy the crown would be. Let's dive into our second tale of absolute workplace reckoning, the king of empty space. Arthur did not look like the CEO of a digital marketing empire that managed ad spends for Fortune 500 companies. He looked like an overworked high school librarian. He wore faded charcoal sweaters with patches on the elbows, drove a dented hybrid sedan, and kept his desktop perfectly bare except for a small, framed photo of his late golden retriever. When Arthur spoke, it was always with a gentle, soft-spoken hesitation, as if he were constantly worried about taking up too much room in his own company. Arthur had founded Omni Media out of his garage 15 years ago. He was a brilliant, old-school data architect who understood the deep back-end mathematics of consumer behavior long before algorithms became a buzzword. But as the company grew to 80 employees and moved into a sleek, open-concept brick warehouse downtown, Arthur stepped back from the spotlight. He let his managers shine, preferring to spend his days quietly reviewing spreadsheets and approving budgets. Then came Christian. Christian was hired as the director of brand strategy, and he was a human hurricane of ambition and pomade. He was 34, possessed a voice that naturally boomed across the open plan office, and dressed like he was constantly modeling for a luxury menswear magazine. Christian didn't care about data. Christian cared about narrative. More specifically, Christian cared about his own narrative. Within 6 months, Christian had effectively hijacked the culture of Omni Media. He took credit for the creative department's late-night breakthroughs, charmed high-profile clients over rounds of golf, and convinced the executive board that he was the sole reason the company's revenue had spiked by 20%. To Christian, Arthur was a relic, a ghost of the past who was holding the company back from truly exploding. Arthur is a nice guy, a sweet guy. Christian would whisper loudly to the junior executives during Friday happy hours, holding a glass of expensive bourbon. But let's be real. He's a dinosaur. He's playing checkers in a world that's moved on to three-dimensional chess. He's terrified of scaling up because he doesn't have the stomach for the big leagues. If we want this company to go public, we need a visionary at the helm, not an accountant. Arthur never confronted Christian. He would walk past the glass conference rooms, see Christian wildly gesturing at a whiteboard filled with meaningless corporate buzzwords like synergistic hypergrowth and audience-centered paradigms, and simply smile softly. He even approved Christian's exorbitant expense reports for client dinners without a single word of complaint. Christian mistook this total lack of resistance for absolute weakness. He began to treat Arthur not as his superior, but as his subordinate. The climax of Christian's arrogance arrived during the pitch for the Vanguard Logistics account, the biggest logistics conglomerate in the country. It was a contract worth $8 million in annual revenue. For 3 weeks, Omni Media's creative and data teams worked 80-hour weeks. Arthur himself stayed up until 3 a.m. for 4 consecutive nights, personally coding a proprietary, predictive ad bidding script that would guarantee Vanguard Logistics a 30% drop in customer acquisition costs. It was a masterpiece of back-end engineering. On the morning of the pitch, Christian took the presentation deck, stripped Arthur's name from the technical slides, and locked the rest of the team out of the boardroom. He delivered the pitch alone to the Vanguard executives, presenting Arthur's brilliant code as his own personal invention. The pitch was a triumph. Vanguard Logistics signed a 3-year exclusive contract on the spot. That afternoon, flushed with the adrenaline of victory and backed by the worship of the younger staff, Christian decided it was time for the final coup. He walked straight into Arthur's quiet office without knocking, throwing a printed copy of the signed Vanguard contract onto Arthur's bare desk. "Arthur, we need to talk about the future of this company," Christian said, leaning over the desk, placing both hands firmly on the wood to intimidate the older man. "Vanguard didn't sign with Omni Media. They signed with me. The board knows it, the clients know it, and the industry knows it. Your passive leadership is stifling our growth. I'm going to the board tomorrow morning to request a structural restructuring. I want the title of Chief Operating Officer, full creative autonomy, and an equity stake that matches yours. If you don't grant it, I walk, and I take Vanguard and the entire creative team with me." Christian waited for the panic. He expected Arthur to stutter, to plead, to offer a frantic countercompromise. Instead, Arthur slowly closed his laptop. He looked at the contract on his desk, then up at Christian. His eyes were entirely calm, lacking even a hint of surprise. "You've been working very hard, Christian," Arthur said softly, his voice completely level. "And you're right. Perhaps I have been holding this company back from a certain visibility. If you feel you are ready to carry the full weight of Omni Media on your shoulders, I won't stand in your way." Christian blinked, momentarily thrown off by how easily the old man had broken. "So, you're agreeing? You'll step down as active manager." "I will do you one better," Arthur replied with a faint, polite smile. "I will take a 6-month sabbatical, effective immediately. I will hand over the day-to-day operations, the client relations, and the entire infrastructure of Omni Media to you. The board will grant you the title of acting CEO. If, after 6 months, the company is thriving under your vision, I will permanently retire and sell you my remaining shares." Christian's heart leaped into his throat. It was easier than he could have ever dreamed. "You won't regret this, Arthur. I'm going to take this place to the moon." "I'm sure you will," Arthur said. Arthur packed his small photo of his dog into a briefcase, shook Christian's hand, and walked out. He didn't leave a forwarding address, and he turned off his corporate phone. The first 2 weeks were a honeymoon. Christian moved into the master office, bought a $5,000 Italian leather sofa, and spent his days doing interviews with local business magazines, branding himself as the tech wunderkind who had saved Omni Media from stagnation. But by week 3, the cracks began to appear. The Vanguard Logistics account went live. On Monday morning, the Vanguard system suffered a massive data anomaly, a sudden shift in the regional ad bidding market that Arthur's predictive script was supposed to automatically correct. But the script didn't correct it. Instead, it threw a critical system error, demanding a manual override code. Christian was called into the server room. The lead developer, sweating profusely, looked at him frantically. "Christian, the bidding script is hemorrhaging $80,000 of Vanguard's budget every hour. We need to manually recalibrate the core algorithm. Where is the source documentation?" Christian stared at the flashing red screen. "What do you mean?" "Just fix it. Use the automated override." "We can't," the developer cried. "The automated override requires a master cryptographic key. Arthur always handled the back-end architecture. We thought you wrote this deck. You presented the technical architecture to the client. What's the key, Christian? Christian's mind went entirely blank. He didn't know what a cryptographic key even looked like. He had spent his career memorizing buzzwords, not code. Call Arthur! Christian shouted. We tried, the developer said, panicking. His phone is disconnected. His personal email is bouncing back. He took down his private server. Before Christian could process the panic, his phone rang. It was the CEO of Vanguard Logistics, and he was not happy. Christian, our dashboard shows a massive discrepancy. We've lost over $100,000 in the last 2 hours due to erratic ad placement. If this isn't resolved by the end of the day, we are pulling our account, suing Omnimedia for breach of contract, and blacklisting your agency across our entire corporate network. Christian slammed the phone down, his hands shaking. He spent the next 12 hours trying to reverse engineer Arthur's work, hiring expensive external consultants who took one look at the proprietary code and said it would take months to understand. By Friday, it wasn't just Vanguard. 3 other major clients suffered similar analytical drop-offs. Without Arthur quietly managing the server loads, balancing the budgets, and manually adjusting the back-end code every morning over his filter coffee, the entire automated machine of Omnimedia began to cannibalize itself. The creative team, completely burnt out by Christian's lack of actual operational direction, began to quit. Within 2 months, Omnimedia was facing bankruptcy. The board called an emergency meeting to remove Christian from his position. Christian sat in the glass boardroom, his tie undone, his expensive suit wrinkled, staring at a room full of furious investors. The door opened, and Arthur walked in. He didn't look angry. He looked refreshed, wearing a comfortable new sweater, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. He sat down at the end of the table. Arthur! Christian gasped, clawing at any shred of hope. Thank God. You have to fix the servers. The Vanguard account, the code, it's failing. I don't know what happened. Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee. Nothing happened, Christian. The code is working exactly as it was designed to. The room went dead silent. What do you mean? Christian whispered. I built that predictive script. Arthur said, his voice dropping its soft hesitation, replacing it with a terrifyingly cold precision. And I designed it to require a manual data maintenance cycle every 14 days. For 15 years, I have quietly performed that maintenance every single alternate Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. I did it so my team wouldn't have to worry about the back-end stability. I did it so our clients would always have a flawless experience. Arthur leaned forward, looking directly into Christian's hollow eyes. You told the board that I was a dinosaur playing checkers. You told them my salary was a waste of overhead. So, I decided to show you what this company looks like without the dinosaur. I gave you exactly what you asked for, Christian. I gave you the crown. But you forgot that a crown is just a piece of heavy metal if you don't know how to forge the iron. The board members looked at each other in shock. The VP spoke up. Arthur, can you fix it? Of course I can, Arthur said, but not under the old structure. Christian has accumulated over $2 million in operational debt and legal liabilities in just 60 days. To save Omnimedia, I will personally buy back all outstanding shares from the board at a 20% discount, taking absolute private ownership of the firm. And as for Christian, Arthur turned his gaze to the ruined young man. Christian's employment is terminated, effective immediately. Furthermore, because he signed the Vanguard contract under false pretenses, claiming personal authorship of proprietary company code that he could not maintain, Omnimedia will be filing a formal civil lawsuit against him for corporate fraud and gross negligence to protect our clients' losses. Christian felt the room spin. He had wanted to be the king of the castle, but he had only ever been an actor standing in an empty space that Arthur had spent a lifetime building. Arthur stood up, clicked his laptop open, and typed a single 12-character master key into the main terminal. Within 30 seconds, The boardroom monitors flashed green. The data stabilized. The Vanguard hemorrhage stopped. "Pack your things, Christian," Arthur said softly, returning to his gentle, librarian tone. "And please leave the Italian leather sofa. It actually matches my new office perfectly." Christian learned the hardest lesson the corporate world has to offer: never confuse a leader's humility for a lack of utility. Some bosses don't need to bark commands, because they hold the literal keys to the kingdom. But for our third and final story, we are moving away from technical code and structural blueprints into the brutal, fast-paced world of corporate acquisitions and high-finance hospitality. This is a realm where power is measured in leverage, and where the most dangerous people aren't the ones sitting in the corner offices. They are the ones who have been overlooked so long they know where every single skeleton is buried. If our first two bosses used math and systems to execute their revenge, our final boss used something far more devastating: absolute, unyielding human psychology. Let's conclude our compilation with our final tale of workplace reckoning, the comptroller's audit that, if you walked into the regional headquarters of the Grand Meridian Hotel Group, you would probably walk right past Clara. She was 62 years old, had silver hair tied back in a neat, utilitarian bun, and wore sensible orthopedic shoes that made no sound on the plush corporate carpeting. Her title was Regional Comptroller, a bureaucratic way of saying she managed the internal accounts, payroll discrepancies, and operational receipts for 15 luxury hotels. Clara had been with Grand Meridian for 34 years. She knew the cost of every linen sheet, every industrial kitchen mixer, and every ounce of caviar imported from France. She was quiet, meticulously polite, and possessed a memory like a steel trap. To the ambitious new regional vice president, a ruthless 30-something named Derek, Clara was nothing more than an expensive line item on the administrative budget. Derek was brought in by the corporate board to streamline operations and cut fat before a massive, multi-billion-dollar private equity buyout. He was a man who measured human worth entirely by a spreadsheet. He didn't see 34 years of loyalty. He saw a retirement package he could eliminate to make his quarterly efficiency metrics look spectacular to the board. Clara belongs to a different era of business. Derek announced during an executive leadership meeting, deliberately holding it while Clara was out of the room. She's still manually verifying vendor invoices. We are migrating to an automated AI auditing system next month. Frankly, her salary is twice the market rate for a data entry clerk. I'm going to restructure her department, phase her out, and allocate those funds to our executive marketing bonuses. Derek didn't just want to fire Clara. He wanted to force her out so the company wouldn't have to pay her substantial severance package. He began a systematic campaign of psychological warfare. First, Derek moved Clara from her quiet, windowless office on the executive floor down to a repurposed supply closet next to the service elevator. Then, he stripped her of her senior staff, leaving her to process thousands of physical invoices alone. Finally, he instituted a rule that Clara had to log every single minute of her day, including bathroom breaks, on a digital tracker. During weekly status updates, Derek would smirk as he reviewed her logs in front of the younger staff. Only 94% efficiency on Tuesday. Clara, let's make sure those orthopedic shoes are moving a bit faster down the halls, shall we? The younger managers snickered. Clara didn't flush with anger. She didn't complain to HR. She simply looked at Derek with her calm, pale blue eyes nodded slightly, and said, "I will ensure the logs reflect total accuracy. Derek." What Derek didn't realize was that by forcing Clara to manually audit every single historical invoice to prepare for the AI migration, he had handed her the ultimate weapon. For 3 decades, Clara had kept 2 sets of notes. Not 2 sets of financial books. She was far too honest for fraud. But 2 sets of journals. One was the official ledger. The other was a small, black leather notebook where she recorded the context behind the numbers. She knew which executives used the corporate jet for personal vacations. She knew which vendors received inflated contracts because they were cousins of the board members. And most importantly, she knew exactly what Derek had been doing since he arrived. Derek was a man of expensive tastes, and he liked to live large on the company's dime. He had been masking personal luxury trips to Miami and Aspen as regional site inspections. He had been funneling premium consulting fees to a shell company registered under his wife's maiden name for market analysis that consisted of plagiarized Wikipedia pages. Clara quietly cross-referenced every single one of Derek's expense reports with flight manifests, hotel security footage, and bank routing numbers. She compiled a digital dossier that was so thorough it read like a federal indictment. The trap sprung on a rainy Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks before the private equity buyout was scheduled to close. Derek called Clara into his glass office. On his desk was a formal termination letter. "Well, Clara, the time has come," Derek said, trying and failing to look sympathetic. "The AI migration is complete. Your role has been entirely automated. Because you failed to meet your efficiency metrics 3 times this month, we are terminating you for cause. This means there will be no severance package, and your corporate health insurance terminates at midnight." Derek leaned back, crossing his legs. "I suggest you pack your supply closet and leave quietly. At your age, a public fuss won't look good on a resume." Clara didn't cry. She didn't beg. She reached into her sensible knitted cardigan, pulled out a sleek, encrypted flash drive, and placed it gently on Derek's desk. "What's this? A backup of your recipes?" Derek mocked. "That is a complete forensic financial audit of your tenure at Grand Meridian." "Derek," Clara said, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. It was the tone of a judge reading a life sentence. "Inside, you will find 32 distinct instances of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion totaling $480,000. Derek's smirk vanished. His face drained of color. "You're insane. My expenses were approved by the accounting software." "The software only sees the receipts you uploaded," Clara whispered, leaning forward, her quiet voice filling the room with an icy gravity. "The software doesn't see that the vendor you paid $80,000 to for marketing consulting is a bank account owned by your wife. The software doesn't see that your site inspection in Aspen coincided with your anniversary weekend, where you booked a $5,000 suite for 2 guests. But I see it. I've always seen it." Derek grabbed the flash drive, his hands visibly shaking. "You think the board will care about this? I'm bringing them a multi-billion-dollar buyout next week. I'm untouchable. The board won't care about your morality." "Derek," Clara agreed politely, "but the private equity firm buying us certainly will." In exactly 14 minutes, a copy of this entire dossier is scheduled to be automatically delivered to the lead acquisition lawyers at the purchasing firm. If they see that the regional VP has been actively embezzling funds and falsifying operational metrics, they will immediately invoke the material adverse change clause. They will walk away from the deal. The stock price of Grand Meridian will collapse, and the board will lose hundreds of millions of dollars. Derek stared at her, horrified. He looked at the termination letter on his desk, then at the tiny silver-haired woman he had spent months treating like dirt. "What do you want?" Derek choked out, his voice cracking. "Money? A payout." "I don't want your money, Derek. I have a very comfortable retirement fund," Clara said, standing up. Her orthopedic shoes made no sound, but she seemed to tower over his desk. "Here are my terms. First, you will shred that termination letter. You will write a new contract naming me Regional Director of Auditing, effective retroactively, with a lump sum severance payment of $500,000 for my 34 years of service, payable immediately." $500,000. Derek gasped. "The board will never approve that without an explanation. You will tell them it was a retention bonus to prevent me from taking my industry knowledge to a competitor," Clara replied smoothly. Second, you will submit your own formal resignation to the CEO, citing personal health reasons, effective the day after the buyout closes. You will forfeit your executive bonus, and you will leave this company with absolutely nothing. And if I refuse, Clara checked her watch. You have 11 minutes before the email sends. If it sends, you won't just be unemployed, Derek. I will personally deliver the physical copies of these bank records to the district attorney. At your age, a federal prison sentence won't look good on a resume. Derek collapsed back into his leather chair, completely broken. The sheer, terrifying scale of Clara's trap was flawless. She had used his own arrogance as a blindfold, letting him run rampant until he was completely wrapped in his own noose. At 4:48 p.m., the wire transfer for Clara's $500,000 payout was approved. 2 weeks later, the multi-billion-dollar buyout closed successfully. The very next morning, Derek quietly packed his things in a cardboard box and slunk out of the building forever, his reputation ruined and his pockets empty. Clara stayed on for exactly 3 more months to oversee the transition. On her final day, she walked out of the regional headquarters for the last time. She didn't look back at the glass high-rise. She simply slipped her black notebook into her purse, walked out to her dented hybrid sedan in her comfortable, silent orthopedic shoes, and drove away into a very wealthy, very quiet retirement. And that brings us to the end of our corporate reckoning compilation. If there is one absolute truth to take away from these 3 stories, it's this: the most dangerous person in the room is never the one making the most noise. True power doesn't need to shout, it doesn't need to bully, and it certainly doesn't need to brag. When you underestimate a quiet boss, you aren't exploiting a weakness, you are simply blinding yourself to their strategy. In the end, Julian, Arthur, and Clara didn't just get revenge. They proved that patience, competence, and a meticulous attention to detail will always triumph over unearned arrogance. But now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever worked for an underestimated boss who quietly turned the tables on a toxic employee? Or maybe you've witnessed a corporate reckoning of your own in the wild. Let me know your wildest workplace stories in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more deep dive tales of revenge, malicious compliance, and dramatic corporate showdowns, make sure to hit that follow button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thank you for listening. Stay safe out there in the corporate jungle, and I'll see you in the next one.